fascinating, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so as you might be able to tell, I'm slightly blinded, so I'm going to ask you guys to like clap or make some noise if you've been to New York. Is anyone from New York? That's awesome! Yay! So if you didn't clap or make some noise just now, I have to tell you, what Russell said about New York, that the secret sauce is in the minds of the people, that's as true today as it was when the colony was founded. And I want to tell you about one of those people that I think makes New York special, but because this is storytelling, we have to start a little bit closer to today. So, I get out of the subway, and the cops immediately push me up Broadway. Now, I'm on the Upper West Side, so I'm about a few miles north of where Broadway originally started as the Herenweg back in New Amsterdam at the tip of the island. And the cops are pushing us up Broadway so that we can get over to Central Park, because that's where the protest is. It's November of 2016, and we're all reeling because Donald Trump just got elected. Now, we talked earlier about the inevitability of history. One thing that I think people don't realize now is we in New York never thought this was going to happen. This was someone who had bankrupt projects all over the city. There was no way this guy would get elected president. And so I'm going to this protest along with a lot of other people, and I've been to protests in New York before. Protests in New York are raucous. There's usually music somewhere. It's oddly social, even if we're there for something very serious. And in what I can only assume is part of its Dutch DNA, there's usually a small group loudly protesting something else entirely. Dutch crowd. But this protest is different. It's almost silent. There's thousands of us, and we're just standing still. It feels like a funeral during a plague. We're shocked and grieving, and we're waiting for the next shoe to drop. And I've only felt this once before, when I moved to New York in the months after September 11th. I found my way to these underground clubs and art scenes and poetry slams, and I realized all of these amazing New Yorkers, they knew something else was coming. They knew that what had started on the day of the attacks wasn't done. And they were waiting for, they didn't know what, another attack, a war. There was just this sense of, we are grieving and also we're scared. And so they were making art out of it. And it was really beautiful. And again, I think it's something that comes down to us from the early days of New Amsterdam. I'd like to imagine that at least a couple of those artists that I saw were descendants of Catalina Trico, who is the first European woman to give birth in New Amsterdam. She's got like 1 million descendants, and there's 30 million people in the tri-state area, so I feel like my odds are good. I feel like I must have met one of her descendants. And like me, Catalina moved to New York as a teenager, but this woman had a spine of iron. She'd been orphaned. She was a Protestant orphan from the Spanish Netherlands. And as Russell was saying, this was a part of the world, many parts of Europe, where people were killing each other over Protestant, Catholic, different type of Protestant. And she finally made her way to Amsterdam, and she had a 10-year older sister who had a house on the Ness, and that sister could have probably helped her to a comfortable life. And yet, she chose to get on a ship in what she must have known was a one-way voyage to the other side of the world. Why did she do that? She finally found her way to what could have been, Protestant comfortability, which we still excel at here. And yet, she chose to go. Was it adventure? I mean, to this day, people leave their little tiny Midwestern villages to come to New York. Was it just that sense of adventure? Was it a longing for quiet? This was a woman from a small village in Amsterdam in the 1620s, was booming. It was crowded and bursting, and there was, just like now, it was always under construction. Was there maybe a part of her that just wanted to go live in the woods somewhere? We don't know. We do know that she made an interesting choice. She married a virtual stranger at the Welsekerk, the French-speaking Protestant church. And there's a couple things you know from that marriage. First of all, she was the only one who got married here in Amsterdam. There were 4 other women on this voyage, and they all got married on the ship. So someone was on her shoulder giving her good advice and saying, let's have your honeymoon here. She and her husband both signed with their mark, so we know that they were both illiterate. None of them had parents to sign for them. And they knew, right, from being in this church, that they could have stayed. And off they went. Now imagine going from this small village in what is now Belgium, and then you're just in the middle of a world that's all water. That VOC boat might look big outside of the Skype Art Museum, but it is tiny when you're up amongst the waves. And then they finally get to Manhattan, and almost immediately they're sent up the river to what is now Albany, what was Beverwijk. And they made these like wooden huts that were like a little bit kind of dug in some places so that a visitor the next year described them as huddling rather than dwelling in these huts. And once they had those huts made, the native people came to greet them. Now Catalina would have heard other languages, like even the Spanish Netherlands was pretty multilingual, and you know Amsterdam was bursting with languages at the time. But imagine what that must have been like to be confronted by people that had never seen anything like that before, whose customs were different, whose language was different. And then came winter. Like, I know it used to be colder here than it is now. Like, there used to be an ice skating between the 11 cities. I get that. But you do not know Nordic hell until you've seen upstate New York in January. Thank you, New Yorkers. Thank you. New Yorkers are vouching for me. Imagine what it must have been like. The snow and the wind and the freezing, and the woman was pregnant in a colony with not a lot of women. She gave birth that spring to Sarah, the first European girl born in New Netherlands. And then a year later, they had to go back to, they had to go back to Manhattan, back to the New Amsterdam, because the leader had disobeyed an express command and had gotten involved in a war between 2 of the native groups. And so they decided to just bring everyone back. And so she's going down this river, pregnant with her second child, with a small child. And I can't help wondering, was she frustrated? Was she like, the whole reason I came here was to get away from a continent that was tearing itself apart? I can't believe I'm still dealing with war. Or was this the beginning of the fairy tale of New York? Because when she and Joris got to New York, they built houses on Pearl Street. For the New Yorkers, that's where Francis Tavern is now. It is now the oldest pub in New York. It wasn't built when they built their houses. Joris started making money from the fur trade, and then he used that money to start a tavern. Catalina is running the farm, running the household. Eventually they had 11 children, so that's a lot of household to run. And she's, at some point, learns to read and write because she kept accounts for the tavern that were used in a later dispute. And you spoke earlier about this being a city of 25 languages, and Catalina, I just kind of hope that she was learning those languages as well as learning math. And then there's this little incident that kind of is really easy to skip over in the historical record, but it made me wonder about Sarah. See, when Sarah was 13 years old, so Sarah's the oldest kid, the first girl born in the colony. When Sarah was 13 years old, the first murder happened in the colony. A gunner was stabbed outside the fort. And it made me wonder if Sarah was the first real New Yorker. And if you haven't been to New York, if you've never lived in New York, this is what I mean by that. People who grew up in New York recognize each other. And they also recognize us. I lived in New York for 15 years, and I can't get a sentence out before they're like, oh yeah, but you didn't grow up here. Where are you actually from? There's something different about kids who grow up here. When I first got to New York, I was hanging out with this girl named Sarah, who grew up in a townhouse on Washington Square Park. She was the one who told me that if you have a real silver spoon, you can put it in a champagne bottle and that'll maintain the bubbles. I was also hanging out with this guy who was a rap artist who grew up in the projects. And when they met each other, it was like they'd known each other their entire lives. It wasn't romantic, it was just that real New Yorker thing. So I kind of liked the idea that that was Sarah, that she was the first one to grow up in the tough city of New York. Unfortunately, war came for the colony again. I don't even want to go into the ridiculousness that started this war, but it was attacks and counterattacks, and a lot of people died, including Catalina's 4-year-old son, Jacob. And when that war was finally over, the family moved across the river to what is now Brooklyn, in this little French Protestant community. And there are these lovely stories of Catalina in this community as she gets older and older. Even after her husband dies, people visit her and describe her as just being surrounded by children and grandchildren. Although they also make it clear that she's living independently. So maybe wanting to disappear into the wilderness was part of why she moved here. Why she moved to New York, excuse me. And when she's 59 years old, that's when the English boats enter the harbor. So again, she's got children and grandchildren. She has so much at stake if these boats start firing. And on the Brooklyn side, they're cut off. They're watching the boats go back and forth from the ship and the fort, and they don't know what's going to happen. And honestly, I wish we had a sense of history. I wish I had known of this history when I was standing there in the cold on Central Park West during that protest. It might have been comforting. It might have been comforting, as Tracy pointed out earlier, to know that common sense and a sense of common responsibility had prevailed. But the thing is, that sense of common responsibility, it doesn't just exist within leaders. We found that. I think we found it in this city, and I think we find it in New York as well. The thing I did think about, because I didn't have this history to think about while I was standing there freezing and mourning at the same time, I thought about the blackout. In 2003, a simple mistake knocked out the power for most of the East Coast. And it should have been the purge, right? New York, these 10 million people in New York, no power, what are the cops gonna do? And honestly, it was the most boring, mundane night. As I was walking because there was no subway, as I was walking from Times Square all the way up to Spanish Harlem, there were deli owners who were just giving away water and food for free. I saw younger people helping older strangers. And every kind of semi-residential area that I passed, I saw neighbors talking to each other for what seemed like the first time. I think that's something that New York gets from its Amsterdam DNA as well. And as we're at this cusp, as we're at this tipping point, that's what I hold on to as hope. That we move to these big cities, we turn into these little villages. New York does it just like Amsterdam does, where everyone's got these little tiny communities. But when the chips are down and the need is there, we do find our way to come together, even if it's just to grieve. That's what gives me hope about this history, and that's what gives me hope going forward. Thank you.